Circles, first time I've ever ran. All right, you guys ready? Are you ready? Get on your feet and welcome Two Tanks Jonathan Frakes. Woo! Up. Thank you. Was she talking to me or you?
I think it was you.
Oh.
Joe Lewis, ladies and gentlemen.
Hold on, real quick. Bonehead humor. I'm done. This is about you. It has nothing to do with me. All right. Who's excited? I mean, we have a living legend with us today.
Oh, come on. That's Shatner.
No, I've met Shatner. Actually, Shatner was nice to me. I don't have one of those stories.
I don't either.
He was actually.
Tell you if I did.
Well, he was really nice to me. So really quick.
There is a living legend here, though. Chuck's a living legend. Chuck Norris.
That's true, Chuck Norris. Yes, and I will be doing that panel tomorrow at 11. Come on back.
Give a little plug.
Yeah. Well.
You're not going to do any kung fu work with him.
Dude, look at me. Oh, by the way, we met last night, and I forgot to give you a compliment back. Nice beard. He said it to me.
He used
Sorry.
to be black.
Anyway, I'm only going to start out with a couple of questions, and I'll turn it over to you all, okay?
Okay.
So, you're going to have a ton of Star Trek questions. I refuse to ask you about them. However, I want to know...
What do you attribute the continuing appeal of the show?
Well, that's true,
It's the vision of hope for the future.
That's true.
Gene Roddenberry.
I've got to make it interesting. So let's talk about directing. First of all, tell me what projects you have coming up, what's going on, and then if you can segue into the difference maybe between acting and directing, how you got into directing, and which one you prefer.
Ooh, nice setup. Have you guys been watching any of the new Star Trek Discovery? You stayed with it until it got really good. Well, I just read the first script of the second season and the outline for the second script of the second season, and it's on fire now. You know who we meet? Obviously, at the end of the first season, we met.
Don't ruin it for us who are still... I haven't finished it yet. I mean, it's already got ruined for me.
It's a great cliffhanger, isn't it?
Yeah, spoiler alert. Who's the smartass that said that?
Come on. What about the Orville? You guys watch Seth's The Orville?
That's true. What do you think of the Orville? How do you feel about the Orville? I mean, there's so many Next Generation people on there.
Seth MacFarlane, who I adore, is a full-on Trekkie geek. He gives Patrick work, he gives me work, he gives Dorn work. Dorn was in Ted movies. He had us do the Family Guy episode for him. And when he's wanted to be a captain of a starship since he was 9 years old. And because of the many tens of millions of dollars he obviously made for 20th Century Fox, they said, you can have your dream come true. So he said, I want to make this show, which he wrote, which is The Orville. And he clearly, I mean, if you watch the show, wants it to look like Next Gen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he hired the cinematographer and the camera operator and Brannon Braga, who wrote First Contact, among other things that are fabulous.
That you directed.
That I happen to direct.
Plug.
Robbie Duncan McNeil, one of our wonderful directors from Voyager. James Conway, who directed a bunch of great Next Gen episodes. He hired me. He filled the room with Next Gen people so that the show would look and feel like it. And I think he did it. The audience was skeptical. The audience for Discovery was skeptical. And on both sets, where they were wondering what it was going to be like, I said, when our show came on, they were incredibly skeptical because they didn't want anybody to replace Kirk and Spock and Bones. And I got it, but I didn't have any concept of how bitter and, skeptical is being generous to the way we were treated at the beginning. And then eventually they got the idea that maybe having a bald English captain who with a French name wasn't such a bad idea. And then we had Data, who I adore. I mean, it was, so the show grew and the audience eventually embraced us, and now the people on Discovery are going through the same thing because they're, the new team, and people were skeptical.
Right.
I remember when I did my first convention in Syracuse, New York. The show, I don't even know if we'd aired. It was really, really early on in the 87, I think. And I had never been to a convention. I didn't know what the world was. I didn't know anything about what y'all were like. I didn't know anything. And I was standing nervously in the dealer's room where they were selling the action figures, the limited edition sort of, younger, thinner version of all of us. And on the table they've got, Geordie LaForge for $35, and they've got a limited die-lot Data for $40, and Captain Pecan, the wackiest nut in the galaxy, he's $50. And then at the end of the table, there's a sign, and on my children, the sign says, "Buy any action figure, get Riker free." So,
And look at him today, folks.
that's
Look at
right.
him today.
Which leads me to the answer to your second. This is the two-part question that I happen to have both answers for. I didn't realize what a good segue that was. I'm married to the beautiful and talented Jeannie Francis, who's Laura from Luke and Laura from General Hospital, who's an icon, a legend. So, not only am I like the second best actor in my own house, I got on a television show where I was maybe the fourth or fifth best actor on that show. So I need to learn another craft, I realized. Because I was blessed to be on the show, thankful to be on the show, perfectly happy to be Commander Riker, but I could see that I wouldn't want to be trying to put my kids through college as the guy who used to be Riker. So I shadowed all the other directors for 2.5 seasons on the show, and I bugged Berman incessantly, Rick Berman, who was running it with Gene Roddenberry at the time, and I said, I really want to direct. He rolled his eyes, figuratively and literally. Then I got to spend 300 hours in the editing room with the editors who also wanted to direct and reluctantly taught me what they needed to have, what pieces they needed of the footage to actually make a scene, so I could learn how to budget the time. And then I spent a lot of time in pre-production where the scripts were being altered and they decided what was being what set, so you could figure out with the amount of time and money you have how you can make a show. And then I went through post-production where you spot the sound and you get to approve the composer's work. And anyway, so I learned at Paramount University, as we affectionately call it, LeVar and I and Robbie and those people who came through this, we had the opportunity, by virtue of being on a television show that was shot at Paramount, to actually learn how it was made, and it was one of the great gifts. And so I used to go to work when I wasn't acting every day and hang and watch. And I remember, to go back to the wonderful and talented Jeannie Francis, I had a day off, and I said, I don't think I'm going to go in today. She said, do you want to direct this show? I said, sure. She said, don't you think you should show up? I said, yes, I probably should, honey. So I got my ass in a car and went to work. And then eventually, they relented, and I got an episode. And fortunately, it was a Data episode. It was called The Offspring. A great episode. And because we used to do 26 episodes of television a year, which is a lot of TV, they're not all going to be home runs. So as a director, you're at the whim, at the luck of the draw. I happened to get a Data episode, who was always brilliant, and it happened to be, it was written by Renee Echeverria, who became one of our big writers, went on to be our executive producer, went on to be executive producer on Castle, never stopped working. That was his, what they call his spec script. It was a script that he submitted that was chosen and produced. So I had a Data show, I had Renee's first show, and I was so over-prepared to direct by this point, and I had the sort of strange support of my acting company who made my life miserable and wonderful all at the same time. So that moment of getting the Offspring up on its feet and shooting it successfully was a huge turning point for me, because I realized not only did I like it better than acting, I was better at it, and it's consuming. You know, it's you get to be part of the storytelling from beginning to end. And each week, or each show, after I got off Star Trek and started to direct other shows, you realize each show is different. Each show you go to has a different vibe. It's a different family. It's a different energy. They're made in a different way. For instance, I used to do a show called Castle. You remember Castle with Nathan Fillion? Who I adore. And it's a great show. And Rob Bowman, who used to direct our show, was the producing director on the show. And when you go onto a new show, the producing director sits down with you and says, here's the way it is on our show. And they tell you stuff about the actors, and they tell you stuff about this. And on this show, they say, don't waste our time with any multi-stop dolly moves, which means, if you're doing a big scene, and you have a cunning plan of how to bring some people in, and then they stop there, and then we talk, and then we stop there. He said, if you do anything that well-planned and elegant and time-consuming, you're wasting our time, because all I need is the wide shot and the close-ups. But I want 3 close-ups. I want one here, one here, and one here of everything that everybody says. So that's your marching orders. That's what you do. I did another show with the great Doug Jones and my favorite #1 Noah Wiley called Falling Skies. Remember Falling Skies? On that show, the producing director says, we want to do this show like documentary war footage, where it's all handheld, and you can follow people around and stay in one shot as long as you can. And you follow them, and they see who they're talking to, and you pan to them, and you come back, and you get their reactions, and just, it's sort of free form, but stay. So the exact opposite of what they tell you on. So your job as a director is to make the best version of the show that you've been hired to do, so that when people are bonking through the dial, they recognize Castle, or they recognize Star Trek, or they recognize Falling Star. Long-winded answer. I'm done.
No, it was good. All. See, it wasn't about Star Trek, and wasn't it fascinating? Yes, absolutely. So
I got a little into the weeds. I apologize.
no, it was great. So I'm assuming some of you all have questions. You're not that big of an introverts. Oh my goodness, the lady back there with the purple hair, she just lost it. You do have a question? Do you want to be the first? Yes, you do.
Science officer.
All right, this is how we do it. They talk into this and we throw it. You ready?
Really?
Yeah. You want to throw it to her?
No, you go.
That's good.
No, I'm not.
Sure. I watched Michael Rooker last year take out a ceiling. Who was there for that? Oh God, my throat sucked.
Okay. Would you ever direct an episode?
You have to talk into the box.
Talk into the box, yeah.
Oh, hi.
Even
would
I
you
got
ever
that.
direct an episode of Discovery?
I just did an episode of Discovery.
Whoa! Will you do more?
Yes, I'm about to go back.
That was your question. All right, who else has questions?
This is an interesting technique. I've never seen this at a con before.
Okay, what has been the overall favorite episode you ever directed from the series?
I have a soft spot for The Offspring, obviously. I remember an episode that Brannon wrote, and when I got the script, I thought he was taking the piss out of me. I thought it was a joke. The episode was called Cause and Effect, an episode where in each act the same thing happened. Does this ring a bell? And I think that the ship blew up at the end of every episode, or at the end of every act. So I read it. I thought, oh, that sounds great. Act 2, same thing. So I said, Brandon, what's the deal? He said, good luck. I said, yeah, good luck. So it was like a directing master class. How do you make Act 2 look different from Act 1 when the same thing happens in Act 2 that happened in Act 1? So that was challenging and wonderful. And obviously First Contact is, it's all been... Nice job.
You said that directing made you a better actor. Did acting?
I never said directing made me a better actor. No,
Well,
I
that's
said
what
I was a
heard.
better director than I ever was as an actor. But my
Okay.
wife, the lovely and talented, says that I'm a better actor when I'm directing because I'm thinking and worrying less about the acting. Like I'm more relaxed.
Okay. Do you feel that acting also made you a better director?
Acting definitely made me a better director because then I can speak actor. Because I don't know how, you've seen a lot of actors, right? they're not really healthy people. Not that we're the most self-involved people in the world, the most childish, needy people in the world. So there's a lot of massaging and fondling and a lot
And
of
that's all
care.
pre-production.
That's all metaphorical. But it's, when I went to college, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And some of that training comes in very handy, as you can imagine. I usually let the actors just blow the steam off, when they, you heard about actors that are having fits and, everything is. So if you let them get that out of their system, then you approach them and you say, "You okay? Can we do this now?" Generally, they're like, "Yeah, nothing's wrong." And Berman used to say, how do you handle that when that happens? I said, "I just wait for it to be over." And it seems it's like a simple approach,
Right.
but boy, if you get in the middle of something when somebody's hot and somebody's life is all about something that is essentially just a piece of minutia in the world that we're all living in, but to them it's that. You can give them the space. My approach to this is, acknowledge that they're that upset about it. Let them go through whatever. Generally, I pass it off to the writer who's in the room. So I said, "I think this is a writing problem. Why don't you take it? I'll get a cup of coffee. I'll be right back." Oy. Oy.
Okay, so we have some questions. There's one right here, and then we'll just kind of roll back that way.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. Got
So
a full house in here today.
Yeah. And there's a guy
By
with
the
a
way,
question.
I should say something
You want a
before we
question,
do the
right?
questions. This has been a great convention, and the reason it's been great, not only it's well attended, which is always fun, y'all are fabulous, and it hasn't been the easiest place for y'all to be. I get that, but the truth about people in a certain region of the country is incredibly true. People have been thoughtful, people have been patient, and I commend you, and I thank you. Okay, enough about you.
okay, so I read on a wiki somewhere at one point that
Must be true.
right. That's yeah. That's why I'm asking. That there was a talk amongst the writers to kill off Will Riker and replace him with Thomas.
Oh,
And I wasn't sure if that was true, and if so or if not, I wondered how you would feel about having to switch gears that late in like season 6.
Would they have even talked it over with you about it?
no, I don't think
No.
they would have talked.
No.
But again, to go back to, there wasn't that much difference between Will and Thomas. Like on Discovery, when they see, spoiler alert,
I haven't finished it yet, man.
but you know what goes on, right? You know there's two universes,
Yeah.
like there were on the original series.
Right.
And some of the actors, Jason Isaacs, you can see and Michelle Yeoh, that they have two, really distinctive, fabulous performances prepared. Thomas Riker and Will Riker kind of looked the same, and one was a little dirtier than the other. Marina Sirtis, the lovely and talented Mayim Zadi, she always says she liked Thomas. She thought he was cuter than Will.
Here, here. All right, one more question.
Question is kind of about your directing. How do you approach, like when you were getting ready for Castle, how do you approach like the crime procedural how do you approach that as opposed to like science fiction?
Well, as I said, when you go into a new show, first of all, you watch all the episodes you can watch before you get there if you haven't been a fan of the show. And you are essentially told to make their show, unless you're the one that's created the look of the show, unless you did the pilot yourself. Or on Discovery, I was encouraged to be, as filmic as, when they have money and time, and it's the beginning of the show, and they know that you're, I honor the Star Trek world, but in general, if you go into Castle, you make Castle, and Castle looks a certain way, it's written a certain way, the scenes are covered in a certain way, the acting is, and the show, the appeal of that show, as with most shows, is is the relationships. And you make sure that the relationships are in place, and you sort of, they kid about directors being a traffic cop, but you're trying to keep everybody in their lane and keep the train moving smoothly down the line, and hopefully you pick a couple of moments in the show or a couple of scenes in the show that you want to spend extra time on because they have either emotional import or you can do something stylistic with it. But in general, you're as a television director, your job, and if your job is always, at least in my opinion, is you want to get asked back to do another episode of Castle, is to come in, tell the story cleanly, and come in on time and on budget, and keep the crew and the cast happy. So that's those are sort of you play those 5 elements as well as you can, and it doesn't always go that way. But if you have that objective in mind, it's kind of a recipe for some success sometimes.
Okay. Next question, right behind you. Yeah, there you go.
Aside from the Star Trek universe or whatever, what is your favorite sci-fi/fantasy series, universe, what have you?
Do, 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 do.
You know what I'm loving is Stranger Things. That's nuts.
It's great.
And I love The Librarians, which I produce and direct, which sadly, we got very sad news a couple days ago on The Librarians that it's been canceled. But Dean Devlin, our fearless leader, is taking it to a number of places, including sci-fi, which I think might be a good place for it to land.
Cool. All right.
All right.
So speaking of, well, sort of, with Librarians and Christian Kane to go to Leverage, I know you were very involved in that series. I actually just rewatched the other day the episode where they did the brain tumor and all of that, and you were in the waiting room next to
Tim Hutton.
Tim Hutton. So 2 parts. One, just any story about your time on Leverage, but specifically that scene. How were you able to get through it? Because I've seen some of the outtakes. How were you able to get through that with him just ad-libbing all those weird things into his comms?
That's a very specific and and fond memory. Leverage was shot. We did 5 seasons. The last 4 seasons were in Portland. The first season was in Glendale, which is where that took place. And I was directing the episode after that waiting room episode, the brain tumor episode. And Tim Hutton was he's a very improvisational. He's a fabulous actor, obviously. And he likes to play around. He likes to have his ideas as we're on the, and I don't know. I think Dean Devlin may have been directing the episode. I think so. So Tim and Dean said, "I need somebody to react to play this with." They said, "Well, Frakes is upstairs." I'm like, "Mikey." "Well, Mikey's upstairs." Remember Mikey? And from the commercial.
Mikey will eat anything.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's who I am. Michael will eat anything. So they said, "Go ask Frakes, and he'll come down." Or go tell Frakes to come down, I think is probably how it went. So I came downstairs, and they were already, they'd fallen apart. They were absurd. They said, "Oh, we need to give him a neck brace." So they called props and said, "Get him a neck brace." They put me in a neck brace, and we sat, right up next to each other. And Tim came in and did all that nonsense, and I had to maintain a straight face. And because I was in a neck brace, I was just physically, it was funny. So that's how it happened. I was upstairs. I got called in, and everybody who watches that show mentions, I didn't even have any lines.
You didn't need it.
Face acting only.
Okay, so there's a guy in the door whose arm is going to fall off, and then we got to get it over here to this side of the room. Sorry, we just got to split him up a little bit. Are you ready, dude?
Absolutely.
Oh, don't do that. This better be a good question.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I work at Chick-fil-A, so I'm pressure all the time. Nice to meet you, Jonathan. Asking you shall receive. I grew up with watching TNG with my mother. My dad didn't get into it that much, but we're Republican conservative Christians, and we've been watching the show for decades, pretty much. My mom kind of fell out of it, but I've still kept up with you guys and what's been going on, and I just want to say thank you guys for all the memories, and hopefully continue to be more. maybe one day even be able to be on the show myself, hopefully. TNG is one of the reasons I was started doing voices, such as Q. I enjoy improvising.
I love this, but are you getting to a question?
I am.
Joe Lewis, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry.
Put the
Patience,
pedal
are we?
down.
I have one job. Keep going.
So I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on faith and whatnot, because there's been a lot of episodes revolving around faith, especially even in the later Voyager episodes. There were some very good episodes that I really enjoyed.
You want to know my thoughts on faith?
Just faith in
I
general.
believe
and
there is
Star
a higher
Trek.
power.
What's that?
I said, I believe there is a higher power. And we'd all be naive and arrogant to believe that there isn't something else out there stronger and better than us all.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
That was a very existential question with a very solid answer. All right, let's try to get it. Did you have a strong arm, sir? Can you get it across the room? Well, close enough.
He cracked it right in the
Tried
skull.
to save you.
Close enough.
What is your favorite non-Next Generation Star Trek series?
I'm one of the people who really liked Deep Space Nine. I think they took more chances. Voyager, I love the people on Voyager. Voyager always sort of felt like Next Gen Light to me, and Enterprise felt like they had gone to the well. You know, that was the 1, 2, 3. That was the 4th series within however many years it was. And again, nothing negative about any of the people on the show. It's just that the appetite for Star Trek. Frankly, I thought that Paramount was so friggin' greedy that they created all these shows and watered down how great the essence of what Roddenberry had created was. But that's another. I won't go off on that tangent. I like Deep Space, and in spite of the fact that they were locked and they didn't get to boldly go where no one gone before, people came to them, but they told wonderful stories and they tried things, and there was a lot more use of the magic of time travel and flashbacks, and the characters weren't all, because Roddenberry had died by this point and they had sort of pulled out of that idea that there would be no conflict, which is a very hard way to make drama. There was conflict on that show. People did have issues on that show. And there was some wonderful comedy on that show. I'm working with Ira Bear, who's one of the creators of that show, on this documentary, which I think is going to be out soon. We did a little what's the word I'm looking for?
Shtick?
Not shtick, skit. We did a little skit the other day, last weekend. So that's one of my, I know it's not everybody's favorite, but I always enjoyed it, and I loved working on the show, too.
Yep, I like it too. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Part of my job is introducing 9 and 10-year-olds to theater. I was wondering if you had early experience in theater and maybe what roles. And the second part is, I caught you on Face Off one time, wondered how you got pulled into that.
I'll answer the second part first. Face Off was hosted by and produced by Michael Westmore's daughter. Michael Westmore was the king of makeup who did our show. I had a short Michael Westmore story for you. Westmore, he used to do Brent in the morning. He used to paint Data, and somebody else did Worf, and he did both of the women, but he didn't do any of the humans like Patrick and me. So, and we were always lucky enough to come into work late. I mean, Dorn was there at 4:30 in the morning. We come waltzing at about 6 or 6:30 for a 7 o'clock start, and they'd already been there for a couple hours, and it was great being a human being. But one day I was called into work late, and everybody had already been there, so because I was in a scene that was halfway through the day, and I got to go to Westmore's chair, which was great. This is a guy who used to make up Betty Davis and Paul Newman. Is that mine?
No, it's...
I was sort of waiting for my wife to call, but hopefully not during the thing. And so Westmore is telling me stories about the old days of, I think it was about Betty Davis, and he's working on my face. He's putting pancake on my face, and he powders it down, cleans my beard up a little bit, gives me a pat in the back, and sends me out because he'd finished the story. So I went into my chair on the bridge, and Marvin Rush, who's the DP, who's also on The Orville, says, "Frakes, look at me." So he said, "Turn your head." So I turned my head this way. And he said, no, turn it the other way. Turned my head the other way. He said, you've only got makeup on half of your face, he said. So I had to go back and see the king of makeup, the Academy Award winner, and remind him that he hadn't finished the other half of my face. That's how I got roped into Face Off.
And the second part of your question was theater?
Theater.
Yeah, theater.
I started as a theater major at Penn State, and I had the privilege of being with this trio of teachers who were quite amazing. They had all decided at some point in their careers, one was from the Actors Studio, and one was from the Neighborhood Playhouse, all these hot shit places in New York to study acting. They came to Penn State to get out of the madness of the city. So they were there, and that attracted a whole bunch of great graduate students from all over the country. And as a matter of fact, one of the big feeding places that we fed was Actors Theater Louisville, which is arguably one of the best theaters in. And my oldest, dearest friend from Penn State is a guy named Bill McNulty, who's still in the company there. And John Jory used to run that theater, and he came up to direct at Penn State. So I did a lot of plays there. I did Arthur Coppett's Indians there. I did Carousel there, and I dabbled in musicals. And I'll tell you a brief story about a production of Man of La Mancha. You know Man of La Mancha? Mm-hmm. And I played Don Quixote. And I'll never forget, actors who say they don't read reviews of what they do, I think are liars, probably. I made the mistake of reading my reviews. And they said of my performance as Don Quixote, Jonathan Frakes did as well as could be expected in the role of Don Quixote. It's a humbling profession. Which brings me to a thought of Will Wheaton. Remember Will Wheaton? Yes. Dr. Wesley Crusher? Not doctor, doctor's son. So he grew up on our show. He was a kid. He was 12 probably or 13, and he stayed with us until he was whatever. And he got his driver's license while we were all working together. And he thought he was such hot shit. He had his so he bought the same car that Patrick bought, which was a Honda Civic. And he had his driver's license, and by this time he was tall and handsome and full of himself. And we finished work at the same time one day, and we were sidling back to the parking garage at Paramount. He looked at me like this with his little teenage swagger, and he says, you know, Frakes, I can tell by the clothes that you wear and the music that comes out of your dressing room. You used to be cool, huh? Will Wheaton, who would play Riker in the new version of Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Damn you, Will Wheaton. All right, next. We got time for just a couple more. Let's throw it around a little bit, maybe towards up here somewhere. They don't, yeah, go ahead.
So what was it like switching from TNG, which is awesome, to doing voice acting and being animated for Gargoyles? Because it was like one right after the other.
Gargoyles. The voice acting is the best gig. There's some fabulous voice actors here this week, too, this weekend. First of all, you're not limited by anything. I mean, you're free to do all the work with your voice. So you get to overact, which you don't often get encouraged to do on the show. You have the, hopefully a director or the writer is there to tell you, to rein you in. But also, I mean, you can go to work in your pajamas when you're doing voice work. There's always good food. It's the actors who are lucky enough to be in that world. It's a very hard world to crack. And I'm lucky to have a couple of different jobs on different shows now that I adore. It's a family, and I think it's elusive how not complicated, how specific it is, and how much it means to the story to have an actor who you now identify with the character. What's really not exactly in the same world, but what is also elusively exhausting is doing books on tape, where you make the mistake of trying to do a little character. I used to do more than I do now, but I would try to do the men in the story and the women in the story. And I'd have to raise my voice, and then I'd do bad accents for an Irish character. So I got myself so stitched up. And I'd say, did I do something when this guy was in, 4 chapters ago? And I'd say, yeah, it sounds like this, and then you got to match that. So, I mean, these are high-class problems, believe me. But it's it's wonderful, and it's a challenge in a different way than being on camera. I didn't really answer that well, but I used a lot of words.
All right, let's throw it around here. Who has it? Yeah. Just
Who
throw
has
it.
the conch? It's like the conch shell in
Yeah,
Lord of the Flies, is it not?
That's true. I never.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah. All right.
Only you'd really get hurt if they were throwing that big conch shell around.
I wanted to know your thoughts and feelings on Quentin Tarantino wanting to make a Star Trek film, or I guess as far as we know, he is making one.
I'm fascinated by the possibility of this. I'm not convinced that that's going to be real, and I'm not sure that the Quentin's gestalt and what he is known for is quite in the same wheelhouse of what we've all known Star Trek to be. But
do you think?
I'm an eternal optimist.
Yeah.
And I texted with JJ, my close personal friend, who I'm a big fan of, by the way. I know some aren't, but I think he's a wonderful storyteller, and I think he did a great job, especially with the first Star Trek movie. I said, what's up? What is happening with this? And he said, and I asked him if it's real. He said, so far it looks real because they put a writer's room together. And he said, Quentin said it's going to be wild. So that's as close as I've gotten to an answer, which is a word we probably always thought it was going to be anyway. Yeah. But I feel like I mean, he could surprise us and bring it into, a R-rated world or PG-rated world where Star Trek kind of lives. And it could be incredibly creative. I noticed Patrick Stewart was smart enough to offer his services as soon as he heard the name Tarantino mentioned. So I'm as curious as you are. I'm not sure that it's going to be real, that'll come to fruition, but I do know, at least reliable sources say that there is a writer's room open and that they are working on a story and that JJ and Quentin have, agreed to move forward. So we will see.
Okay.
But for the moment, the Star Trek we have has really found its voice. The Discovery, I think, has really, really found its voice. And the Orville has filled in a void. For a lot of people, the Orville is their new Star Trek because it does tell stories like our show, and it's got wild humor in it.
Yeah. All right, we've got time for one last question. This ma'am right up here with the blue on. There you go.
Nice soft hands and short stuff.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you were shooting scenes and reading scripts for Next Generation during production, was there much discussion of the original series?
That's a really good question. There wasn't. There may have been in the writer's room. I'm sure there was more in the writer's room than womb. There's a Freudian slip. The writer's womb is the place from which the shows are born.
Yeah. Just
That's
go with it and
happened
pretend
before.
you meant it. Just pretend you meant it.
Wow. I'm sure that that was discussed in the writer's room.
Womb.
And that there's a certain, and I know in the Discovery writer's room, there's a very strong Star Trek presence in terms of the writers and their respect for the canon of the original show. On our show, I think there are references to it. I'm not sure that I think we were a century away, if I'm not mistaken, from TOS. That's a really good question. I suspect there was more discussion in the room and that those answers were found before the scripts got to us.
Okay, so we're out of time. Give
That's
it up.
it?
That's it. You want? Hold on. If you want to do, Mr. Frakes will be at his table the rest of the weekend, correct?
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. Give it up for Jonathan
Live
Frakes.
long and prosper.
I need everybody to stay here just for